Today we are talking about my AFC playoff predictions. You're listening to You Don't Know Jack. That was a quick, snappy intro. We got business to take care of. I'm excited. We did the NFC playoffs already. Go take a look at that video. I feel pretty confident. Whereas in the AFC, I feel like there's a lot of room for different scenarios to really blossom. And so let's start in the NFC North. I think this division is pretty clear cut, except there are some outliers. So let's begin with Baltimore. I have Baltimore at a 13-4 record. I just think they're really the most consistent team on both sides of the ball. You have Lamar Jackson, an MVP candidate every single year, balling out. And I just trust their defense more than any defense outside maybe Pittsburgh in this division. And I think their schedule pretty much aligns for them to have a very successful year, so that's why I have them at 13 wins. But then the first question mark in this division arises, and that's with Cincinnati. I have Cincinnati at an 11-5 record, which feels very steep, like steep incline. Defense is still a huge question mark, massive question mark, and I'm really banking on their offense just clicking on all cylinders, right? Joe Burrow is going to potentially be another MVP candidate this year. His team will have the wins. Who knows if he'll get the award? We'll get to the awards a little bit later, but I have them at an 11-5 record. I feel pretty confident about that. Their schedule, again, is somewhat tough, but they are playing, I believe, a third-place schedule. So it's not the most insanely difficult schedule out there. Speaking of insanely difficult, though, then you have the Cleveland Browns. I have them at 3-14. Don't like their QB room. Doesn't matter who they go with. I don't love it. I'd prefer them probably to go with a younger quarterback just to get some experience there, as it is kind of a gap year, especially with them starting Joe Flacco. It doesn't feel like they're really going all in, even though he is their best chance to win. I wouldn't be doing too much winning if I was Cleveland, but they feel different. They have the defense for it. Myles Garrett's coming back after his massive extension. So we'll see how really they progress on offense. Really, outside of Jerry Jeudy, though, I don't love their wide receiver core, and they're running out a running back room that is now without Nick Chubb. So we'll have to see how that offense really progresses throughout the season, if they make any quarterback changes, or they kind of, grow their positions in terms of wide receiver or running back. And then to conclude, I probably have the team that's the biggest wild card in this entire conference, and that's the Pittsburgh Steelers. I have them at 7-10, their first losing season under Mike Tomlin. And like a lot of people have been really predicting the downfall of the Steelers. And I can get behind that. I really don't like Aaron Rodgers as a quarterback, especially in the year of 2025. Them getting DK Metcalf was an interesting trade. I think they had that guy in George Pickens, but obviously there was some personality differences there, and they moved off him, shipped him off to Dallas. And so they signed a guy like DK. He's going to be their now franchise wide receiver. I like him, but I think this, Pittsburgh team is kind of in limbo. They're not great, but they're not terrible. And so I have them dropping a couple more ball games for them to have a losing record at 7 wins. And that just comes down to, is Aaron Rodgers going to be, that guy? Is he going to be good enough for them to win games? From what I saw in New York last year, obviously it's New York, this is Pittsburgh, two completely different franchises. However, I'm just not going to put, my eggs in that basket. I'm not trusting that situation. I think this could be the last year for a lot of people in Pittsburgh. So we'll have to see how that progresses. But 7 wins feels like the right spot for Pittsburgh this year. So let's transition now into the NFC South. This division has gotten a lot of flack for being one of the worst. It's been really spearheaded by Houston, making some noise in the playoff with back-to-back years of playoff victories. I have them at a 10-7 record. I looked at their schedule, obviously first place schedule, and it seems a little bit tough. They're dealing with some injuries on the offense, Tank Dell, Joe Mixon. I think they could potentially get off to a slow start, but then gain some momentum late. And so I think 10-7 is not only a fair record for Houston, but it still wins them the division, because I have Indiana at 5 wins, Jacksonville at 6 wins, and Tennessee at 3 wins. Now look, I may be too low on Tennessee here with 3 wins, but I think their roster is still growing. Under Brian Callahan, his second year as the head coach, I like Cam Ward as a prospect. We'll have to see how he really progresses in year one. But then you look at teams like Jacksonville and Indianapolis. I feel like both these teams are in kind of that limbo, right? They're in that middle ground. More so Jacksonville than Indy, because Indy decided to go with Daniel Jones. And I think that is, again, it's a very similar move to Cleveland. In the fact that they're like, Daniel Jones, give us the best chance to win now. And I just don't think that's the right move, right? Because see what you got in Anthony Richardson. If he can't stay healthy, that's one thing. But if he can stay healthy this year, why not throw him out there to start? That's a whole different discussion. But even with Daniel Jones, I actually dropped them a couple wins than what I would have had originally. Now look, I've watched Anthony Richardson's tape. It's not the prettiest thing, right? But there, you got to feel like there's some upside to him over Daniel Jones. And so if they stick with Daniel Jones this whole year, I think this record will play out at 5 wins. For Jacksonville, again, I'm a little bit higher on Jacksonville, at least from an offensive standpoint. I think Trevor Lawrence has a lot to prove this year. The running back room has a lot to prove this year. Brian Thomas Jr., the rookie last year, was a breakout. Will he continue his, I won't say breakout career, but his successful career so far and being one of those top wide receivers in the league? Their offense is really, the main thing I would bank on this team, especially with, Cohen, the new head coach over there in Jacksonville. And so for them, though, it's the defense. It's the defense that I can't necessarily get behind too much. I haven't looked too much into it, so maybe a little bit of my negligence bias, kind of straying away from Jacksonville. A lot of people have Jacksonville making the playoffs, but they're a team I'm going to be somewhat fading this year at 6 wins. So to recap, I'll recap the North too. Baltimore at 3-14, Cincinnati at 11-5, Cleveland at 3-14, Pittsburgh at 7-10, and then in the AFC South, I have Houston at 10-7, Indianapolis at 5-12, Jacksonville at 6-11, and Tennessee at 13-4. So now we transition into the AFC East, and this one is another very clear division. I would be surprised if anyone had the Bills not winning this division. I have them going 13-4. Again, they have a very favorable schedule. Now, again, that's in part because they play, I believe, an easier division this year. And they potentially could win big road games big games such as Baltimore and Kansas City later in the season. I think they're built for those games. And so, Baltimore, as I don't want to necessarily, get too overzealous over Josh Allen and the possibility of the Bills this year, because it feels like everyone buys into that year in and year out. However, I just think this division has, taken a step back in terms of being really competitive. And what do I mean by that? Well, I still have Miami at 10-7. I think a lot of people are actually, selling their stock on Miami when I think it's a little early. I still like their offense. Tyreek Hill's still there. He'll have something to prove. And if he doesn't, they can trade him at the deadline potentially and get some pieces back to gain some momentum later in the season, or just rebuild, right? That's obviously worst case for Miami, but 10-7, I like their offense, under Mike McDaniels. We'll see how the defense goes. Again, another question mark, very similar to Jacksonville. However, I think Jacksonville is worse for wear offensively than Miami. I think Miami has more explosiveness to their offense than Jacksonville, so that's why I have Miami getting 4 more wins than Jacksonville. Now, again, I think Miami is probably around the 500 range, 9-8, but I'm giving them a couple more wins because I think has a little bit more potential to kind of be a riser this season rather than falling off. Then we have New England at 7-10. A lot of people are going overzealous with New England this year, thinking they're going to be a playoff team. I think that's a little early. We've seen first-year head coaches get into the playoffs and make noise, especially with young quarterbacks. But I don't believe they're going to win any of those Bills games. They could potentially, it would be a success if they split with Miami this year and they'll sweep the Jets. So, and then you look at their schedule as a whole, it's somewhat tough. Now, again, they have the home field advantage at Foxborough. Will that carry over to this new, regimen, to the Mike Vrabel, just the offense, the aura that Tom Brady and Bill Belichick had at Foxborough? Will that translate to this new era New England team with Drake May? We'll see. But I think it's a little overzealous to have them winning any more than 7 games this year. I believe they could probably be around the 8 to 6 win area. I'll have them at 7-10 this year. And then the New York Jets. This Justin Fields signing is an interesting one. We'll see how that progresses. I made a short on it. I'm not very high on the Jets this year. I'm not very high on Justin Fields. I think he's a talented runner, but his passing never really developed into anything special. And for that, I have them at a 4-13 record. I just don't have a lot of wins on their schedule. I think this may be a little high for them. But again, I think their defense has, the gutsiness to pull out some close ball games. And, if Justin Fields, Breece Hall, Braylon Allen, if they could really get the run game going and really rely on their defense, but then be able to at least somewhat control the ball, that could be a very interesting factor for the Jets offense. Whereas if you got to, try to get Garrett Wilson involved, that requires Justin Fields to be able to pass on the ball, I would probably stay away from that. But the Jets have a scary potential to win ball games. Like they have, I feel like, the vision to win. I just don't think that comes to fruition. That's why I have them at 4 wins. So to recap the East, Buffalo at 13-4, Miami at 10-7, New England at 7-10, and then New York Jets at 14-3. So that brings us down to the final division in the AFC with the AFC West. I again made another podcast talking about them being potentially the best division in football, and I still think that holds up a little bit true. My predictions may not necessarily reflect that because I have the division winner being Kansas City. I find it really hard to fade Kansas City, at least until something else happens, right? If this team keeps making Super Bowls, how are you going to say they're not going to win the division, right? A lot of people are putting a lot of chips on Denver, a lot of chips on the Chargers to be good this year. And I just want to slow the roll there. Because even with Rashee Rice missing the first 6 games, if he comes back, Travis Kelce is a little bit more focused this year. That offense could be something more reliable. Now again, Matt Nagy was talking about them expanding the offense to more downfield, long plays, explosive plays. We'll see against the first game against the Chargers if that's actually true, right? If Xavier Worthy is used to that massive potential, like a Tyreek Hill role when he was on the Chiefs. Just massive, long plays, 60-yard plays, absolute nukes from Mahomes. We'll see if that translates. If that does, they could easily be the first seed in the AFC with that offense. Because the offense has been the only thing holding them back in the regular season from truly being dominant. Now, last year they were great, but their defense was excellent. I expect the same thing this year from Kansas City's defense. Again, another underrated defense, and I think they'll win the division at 12-5, though. I don't think it's as dominant as a season as Baltimore or Buffalo. I think there's a little bit step back, but I still think it's a very solid season from Kansas City. And that's in part because the division is getting a little bit tougher. And that's why I have Denver at also a 12-5 record. I looked over their schedule, and I was like, they could win 12 games. And then I did Kansas City's, and I was like, they could also win 12 games. So I was a little bit confused. I was like, I want to pick Kansas City. I'm not picking against Kansas City. But I was like, but Denver has the same amount of wins. Now look, I may be overzealous on Denver the same way people are going overzealous for New England or even a Cincinnati like I am. But I think Denver has the real solid potential. They have clearly a home field advantage out there at Mile High. Pat Surtain II, reigning Defensive Player of the Year. There's potential with this defense to be easily top 3 in the league. And then you factor in the potential continued breakout of Bo Nix, right? Under Sean Payton for his second year. What does that look like? Right? There's no expectations of a rookie wide receiver or a rookie quarterback now. He has a full year under his belt. He looked good in his rookie season. And I think he is at a point in his career for them to really take that next step and become a playoff contender. That's why I have Denver at 12-5. Then I have Las Vegas at 6-11. I just think they're in a tough spot. I think they would have a lot more wins if they were in the South or even in the East. But they're in the West, and I just think it's a tough place. 6 wins almost feels like a lot, just considering their schedule. And just the aura around the team. I think it's a little bit too reliant on Ashton Genty. I like him as a prospect. I think he'll be a good running back for the next 5 to 6 years. However, are they built for that right now? I don't think so. And I just don't think that experiment is going to work this year. Geno Smith comes over from Seattle. So same thing with Pete Carroll taking over the head coaching role. So it feels like they're cooking in Las Vegas. I'm just a little hesitant that's going to burn, right? And I don't like them more than any of these teams. I can honestly see a scenario where Las Vegas still wins 6 games, but they don't win a single division game. Just because I really like this AFC West. And speaking of the AFC West and the final team, the Los Angeles Chargers, I have them at 9-7. A winning record, but I do have them missing the playoffs. something about their offense to me isn't necessarily clicking. I don't know if it's necessarily the wide receiver core, right? With Ladd McConkey leading the way. What's going to be of Quentin Johnson? I've always kind of been higher on him since I'm a TCU Frog, but I think he has a chance to have a make or break year. He had I think he had 8 touchdowns last year. If he could follow that up, it's really just, can he get the receiving yards up? Because I think this offense needs another weapon in that wide receiver court. We saw Ladd McConkey break out last year. He was more of their yards guy. So if they can get more production from their wide receiver court, Keenan Allen comes back, I don't expect that to be too much of a factor, right? They draft Omarion Hampton out of UNC. He seems to be their now lead back. Him and Najee Harris seem to really be a 2 running back committee. And so for the Chargers, I just don't think they're as good as Denver, and I don't think they're as good as Kansas City. And so for that reason, I have them dropping a couple ball games at a 9-7 record, missing the playoffs. This very similar season to last year. I think you'll see the steps, towards progression of this team, but they could fade a little bit later. And so for that, I have them missing the playoffs. I could easily see, though, 3 teams from this division, being Denver, Kansas City, and Los Angeles, making the playoffs. But I think it's going to be too competitive, and I don't think there's a true, alpha dog in terms of the whole AFC in this division to, rack up some wins. So let's transition now into the AFC playoff picture. Now I've taken all my standings. I've literally noted everyone's record down, and I've ordered it by the potential wins I have this year. And I struggled forming this playoff picture because of tiebreakers and whatnot with some of the top teams. So let's dive into it. So obviously the top 2 records would be Baltimore and Buffalo, both with 13-4 record on the season. And I was like, okay, Baltimore would probably have the 1 seed. But then I re-looked at the schedules, and they play week 1 in Buffalo. And so I kind of want to lean towards Buffalo winning that game. And that could end up being a massive tiebreaker for the 1st seed. And that's how it plays off on this playoff picture. Buffalo gets the 1 seed, Baltimore gets the 2nd seed. When was the last time Buffalo had the 1st seed? That could be big things for the Bills. Then we go to 3, Kansas City, just based off wins, and then 4, Houston, which I don't see it changing other than that. I can see Kansas City going up, but I don't see Houston going up. I think that 4th spot is pretty much theirs. Now again, they're going to dominate their division. I feel like they get 6 free wins every year based off their division. And so for them, are they going to be a team that's truly elite? Right? And I don't want to say they're not going to win a playoff game, because we've seen it the past 2 years of them dominating in the wild card round. But are they going to be good enough to win in the divisional round against the top of the league teams? I don't think that's the case, but that doesn't mean they don't make the playoffs. Them at 4. Then at 5, I have Denver, again based off win totals here. That's going to be a tough game for Houston round 1. Because again, now Houston's dominated. They played the Browns and the Chargers in back-to-back playoffs, both teams with decent defenses, somewhat questionable offenses, and we've seen Houston dominate. But I think Denver has the quarterback and the defense this year to make that a really cool and interesting ball game. Then we have number 6, Cincinnati Bengals. Again, win totals. I think this team is more boom or bust. I think this team will either be scary good in terms of just overall cohesiveness, but then also I could see a really low floor similar to last year where their offense is great, but their defense can't stop anybody. And I think that could somewhat be the case this year. But I trust the offense to be a little bit more run heavy with Chase Brown and kind of gain more control of the football game. And then at 7, this may be a surprise, but I do have the Miami Dolphins. If you were to tell me a week ago, you're like, you have Miami predicted in the playoffs, I'd be like, nah, I don't know. And again, a lot of media is really selling all their stock on Miami. But I'm like, look at their schedule. I could see them sweeping New England, sweeping New York. Do they potentially steal one from Buffalo? That might be a stretch, but I could see it happen. And there's always new playoff teams, right? Miami missed it last year. I think they could, if Tua stays healthy for the majority of the year, Tyreek Hill performs like he has in the past, Jalen Waddle has a bounce back year, that could be a very scary offense, top 10 at least. So I have Miami being the 7th seed, the final playoff team. And so that is the final playoff picture. From the top, I have Buffalo, Baltimore, Kansas City, Houston. And the wild cards, I have Denver, Cincinnati, and Miami. I think this is really any of those top 3 seed teams could make the Super Bowl. Again, Kansas City would potentially be going for the 4th time. Baltimore and Buffalo would be going for the first time in a while for both teams. So I do think it is still Kansas City led, even though I have them at the 3rd seed. But that's where I am right now. So that'll do it for this episode. Only 20 minutes long. Hopefully you guys enjoyed. I will say, make sure you hit that subscribe button. I'm going to do my Super Bowl predictions right after this. I'm just posting that on Friday to give a nice little predictions week. I'm telling you right now, this is shocking, especially for me. I have it written down right here. Hopefully you guys didn't see it. It was a little bit of a spoiler, potentially. But my Super Bowl prediction and my award winners, there's a lot of shockers. So make sure you guys subscribe. I'm Jackson James. You've been listening to You Don't Know Jack. I'll see you guys on Friday.